Okay.
Okay.
Okay. This week's Sedra is Parshas Korach. Last week's Sedra was Parshas Shlach. This week, the Sedra speaks about the revolt that was led by Korach. Last week's Sedra talked about the 12 spies, the 12 Nasiim, the 12 princes of one for each tribe that went in accordance with the instructions they received from Moshe Rabbeinu to search out the land of Canaan, and they came back and they gave a dismal report, and one that caused the Jewish people to become depressed about the possibility of entering Eretz Yisrael. And that also caused a form of revolt. And as a result of that, the Jewish people had to traverse the Midbar for 40 years before they were able to enter Eretz Yisrael, before they were able to enter the land of Israel. This week's Sedra, which according to most Rishonim, most Mefarshim, happened shortly after that incident, talks about the revolt of Korach. And Korach led a rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu. And many of the Mefarshim are intrigued about the juxtaposition between the incident of the Meraglim, of the spies, and the incident of the rebellion of Korach. And what they suggest, for the most part, is that Korach, recognizing the depression of the Jewish people over God's mentioning that they would have to traverse the Midbar for 40 years before they would enter Eretz Yisrael, Korach decided that he would use that moment, use that time to lead a rebellion because of the frustration of the people at that after the incident of the Meraglim, of the spies. Now, while this is certainly the true explanation, I think it needs further elaboration, and I think there are additional reasons which are related to that reason as well. Now, the Sedra starts off this week, Vayikach Korach, and Korach took. But the Torah doesn't tell us what Korach took. And so Rashi mentions two explanations. One explanation is that he took himself. He separated himself from the rest of Klal Yisrael. Korach was a person of divisiveness. And the other pshat, the other explanation is that he gathered the 250 Rosh Sanhedrios, leaders of Bezdin, with him. And he in a sense took a hold of them to join his rebellion. In effect, both pshatim, both explanations are saying the same thing. That Korach separated himself, but he was able to draw people with him in his rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu, to join him in his divisiveness and his trying to create separate groups within Klal Yisrael, within the Jewish people. Now, the question, and I've raised this question before, is when you take a look at the pasuk says, "Vayikach Korach ben Yitzhak ben Kahas ben Levi." Korach took Korach, the son of Yitzhak, the son of Kahas, the son of Levi, took the Dasan Ba'Aviram b'nei Eliyav and Dasan Ba'Aviram, the children of Eliyav, Va'on ben Peles b'nei Ruvain, and On ben Peles, they were all from the Shevet of Ruvain. But the Torah doesn't tell us what did he take. Rashi explains it. But the question is, why is it that the Torah gave a half the statement in the first pasuk? Vayikach Korach. Korach took, without telling us what he took. Yes, Chazal tell us, Rashi tells us, the commentaries tell us, he took himself aside. He drew people with him, with his words, with his campaign. But the Torah doesn't say that explicitly. So why is it that the Torah only mentions a half a sentence? Obviously, there is a thought contained in that half a sentence as well. Now, Chazal tell us that what led Korach to lead this insane rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu. But Korach felt that he should have been appointed as a Nasi for the Bnei Kahas. And he was not appointed. And it is because of this jealousy and of this anger that he led the rebellion. So the cause of the rebellion was this desire for leadership. However, when he approaches the Jewish people, and when he talks against Moshe Rabbeinu, when he instigates the rebellion, he says, "Kol ha'eda kulam doshim v'socham Hashem, u'ma'adua tisnasu kahal Hashem." He talks about equality. He says, what God spoke to all of the Jewish people up till the time of Matan Torah. Perhaps you, Moshe Rabbeinu, was unique. But now God spoke to all of the Jewish people. How dare you put yourself above the other Jewish people? So on one hand, Korach is motivated by his desire, his need, his drive for leadership, for power. And on the other hand, when he speaks, he, on the contrary, posel b'muma posel. When he finds fault with Moshe, he accuses Moshe of the traits that are part and parcel of his personality. And very often, that is a not unusual when you deal with political personalities. We see it every day. And we see Moshe, he especially focused on, while he tried to draw everybody to his rebellion, but his focus was on the Rosh Sanhedrios. Now, the Rosh Sanhedrios, they were leaders. And interestingly enough, he was able to attract leaders of the Jewish people to join his rebellion. And there's a very interesting medrash. Rashi cites it, and I've discussed this medrash before, that the Parsha of Korach comes immediately after the Parsha of Tzitzis. And Korach, when he initiated his rebellion, according to the medrash, this idea was suggested to him by his wife. He said to Moshe, Moshe, you just told us about the Parsha of Tzitzis. You told us about the white strands of the Tzitzis and the blue strands of the Tchelis. He says, but does a blue shirt, a blue cloth, completely blue, dyed in Tchelis, does it also need tzitzis? And Moshe Rabbeinu said, yes, it also needs tzitzis. And he made fun of it, and he took 250 talesim that did not have any tzitzis, attached to them, did not have any fringes attached to their corners, and he dyed all of them blue and tchelis, and he put it under put it on the 250 Roshei Sanhedrios, the leaders of Sanhedrin, that were among his followers. And the question is, what is the symbolism? Why did he pick the mitzvah of tzitzis? Our sages tell us he used the mitzvah of tzitzis and the mitzvah of mezuzah. Tzitzis, we know why he picked, because the Parsha of Korach is mentioned immediately after the Parsha of Tzitzis. It's the juxtaposition, the hekesh, that tells us, that is the source of the words of the sages. Where is the source that they fought over the mezuzah also? That Moshe Rabbeinu, that Korach said to Moshe, Bayis Malei Svarim, you have a house, person lives in a house that has a full library, has chumashim. It has the Megillos at that time. The Torah Shebaal Peh was not yet put into writing, but people were able to have their own, from the Rambam it appears, people were able to have their private notes. It's just they couldn't have a text that was learned by Rabbim. So Bayis Malei Svarim, it has many Sifrei Torahs, many notes of Shiurim, of the words that Moshe Rabbeinu himself taught. Does it need a mezuzah that has two parshios on the door? And Moshe Rabbeinu said, yes, it does. And Korach made fun of it. What is this one little amulet on the door of the house that contains two parshios? Shman v'hayim shemoah. What does that add to a Bayis Malei Svarim, to a house full of Sifrei Torahs? And I think perhaps the basic idea is, when you have a Bayis Malei Svarim, people have libraries. But libraries are study. You have historians that study Torah, but it's not Torah, as I've mentioned before. It's history. You have his sociologists that study society to understand the Jewish society, and they study Torah, but they don't have to make a Birchas Torah on it because it's not Torah. When you have scrolls, it's for study. Of course, Chas v'shalom, we should have that attitude. But unfortunately, many people do have that attitude. Limud Torah is important. Limud Torah is essential, but it has to be learned as Torah. But very often, you see scholars who study the same text, but it's not Torah anymore. But when you have the mezuzah says this house is a house that is dedicated to the acceptance of the yoke of heaven. And perhaps that was the dispute between Korach. Korach, as I'll tell us, was a chacham. He outsmarted himself. But perhaps he was capable of learning, of studying. But he lacked that Kabbalah Sol Malchus Shemayim. And certainly he lacked the Parsha V'Hayim. He lacked the Parsha, the two Parshas of Shema from his personality. And where do we see, though? Tzitzis, we know the connection to Korach. It comes immediately after the Parsha Tzitzis. But Dasan Vaviram, who were part of Korach's rebellion, the Torah tells us that when Moshe tried to make a connection with them, they stood demonstratively. Pesach HaOel. They stood demonstratively at the entranceway to the tent. And perhaps we could suggest, I didn't see anybody suggest it, but standing, why does the Torah have to emphasize demonstratively at Pesach HaOel? In other words, the Pesach HaOel was part of their demonstration of non-recognition of Moshe Rabbeinu's leadership. And the Pesach HaOel, even though there's a Rambam that says a person can live in an Oel, doesn't need a mezuzah. Many point out that's only talking about an Oel that's put up and taken down shortly afterwards. But if you stay for a length of time, then it requires a mezuzah. So those were the two arguments. I explained about the mezuzah. But the question is, what was the argument regarding the tzitzis? Now, when you look at the mitzvah of tzitzis, and I've mentioned this in the past, you have the strings of the tzitzis, the fringes, as they're called, and they're tied with knots, and they're at the four corners of the garment. And four corners, that represents everywhere. And God is identified with everywhere. In a sense, I think that the mitzvah of tzitzis represents the idea that we are tied to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And who is tied to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Tied to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is who is tied to a master. A servant is tied to a master. And in a sense, we are servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the tzitzis symbolizes the servitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I suggested this many years ago, but I saw in some of the Mefarshim already, without their explaining it, they say that the tzitzis symbolizes being servants of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But in any case, I think that this is the idea. But what is tchelis? Tchelis, there is a machlokes between the Rambam and Rashi. The Rambam says tchelis is blue like the sky, the mid-noon. Rashi says it's like the sky toward evening. But blue, we see when Mordechai goes out, when he's appointed Mishnah Lamelech, he wears tchelis. The Kohen Gadol has tchelis, but universally, tchelis at that time was identified with royalty. There was even a color, royal blue. Doesn't mean that that's tchelis, but blue was identified with royalty. So it represents royalty. So on one hand, the tzitzis, the strings of the tzitzis, the knots, which symbolizes the mitzvos of the Torah, as our sages tell us, as the Torah tells us. You'll remember the mitzvos. So that reminds us of our servitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we're also the children of God. Not just the children of God, B'nai B'chori Yisrael. So we are royalty. We say, Avinu Malkeinu. God is our Father, our King. So we are royalty. But our royalty and our servitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes together. But if you have a beged kulo shel tcheles, if the tcheles is not on the strings of the tzitzis, on the fringes of the tzitzis, but it's on the beged itself, it's on the clothes itself. So, if that symbolizes royalty without servitude. Why is it that Korach desired leadership? Why was he so angry that he wasn't the leader? Because he saw royalty, he saw leadership as a position of royalty, not of servitude. Whereas Moshe Rabbeinu saw leadership as a position of servitude, of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of serving Klal Yisrael. But serving Klal Yisrael is part of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, in a sense, if not consciously, unconsciously, it seems that one could have understood through Korach's argument that what his real motive was. His real motive was royalty. The fact that he said, the fact that he said, Kol Eida Kulam Doshim U'B'Socham Hashem, The fact that he said that all of the Jewish people, that was just something that he said. But the question is, why didn't the people recognize what was Korach's real interest? And it's interesting, Korach had other supporters also. Even those who ran away. The next day, the Torah tells us, by Yimim Machras, they came the next day. And they continued their rebellion against Moshe. Atem hamitem am Hashem. They said to Moshe and Aaron, you killed the nation of God. So these people were not given Palesim, only the 250 Rashi Sanhedrios. Because if Korach had given the Rashi Sanhedrin, had given everybody the Talis of Tchulah Shel Chelis, which represented royalty, the 250 Rashi Sanhedrios would not have been happy. Because to them, leadership meant I am above the others. So Korach had a balancing act. He went to each person, and in talking to each person, he tried to appeal to each person, even though there were contradictions. To the Rashi Sanhedrios, he dressed them up as royalty. To the masses, he says, Kol ha'eda kulam doshim u'v'socham Hashem. To those that weren't Kohanim, he talked about how they have to give the Kohen so much, as the Medrash tells us. They have to give truma. Every time they shecht an animal, they have to give part of the animal to the Kohen. So, how are we to understand it? He appealed to each one differently, and the Medrash tells us that the night before that showdown, so to say, between Moshe and Korach, when the earth swallowed up Korach, the night beforehand, Korach went around to each group and talked to each group to get them to join him. So, didn't people recognize the fraud? In Pirkei Avos we say that the kina, taiva, and kavod. Kina is jealousy. Taiva is desire. Kavod is the need for a high regard, honor. Motziin es adam min olam. Take man out of the world. Some of the Mefarshim explain Motziin es adam min olam, that it leads a person to sin. He loses his olam haba. Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek olam haba. But sometimes we could lose our chelek olam haba. But the simple explanation, and I think some of the Mefarshim say it, I don't know if they phrase it this way, But I think Motzinas Adam Olam means they lose contact with reality. They don't talk logically. They don't think logically. B'nai Meri, they become bitter. When someone is bitter, he doesn't care. And it's interesting, Freud said that the power of hate is much greater than the power of love. And I've mentioned this before. And what it is that the different groups, Korach had many different groups. And each group had its own agenda. Perhaps each person had his own agenda. And it was interesting. My father once said, it's very interesting, Chazal say that Korach, because he camped near Shevet Ruvain, he was camping near Ruvain, he was able to have an influence on the Bnei Ruvain, the members of the tribe of Ruvain that were with him, that joined him in the rebellion. Now, who were the people of Bnei Ruvain? Das and Babiram. Das and Babiram, they were already rebellious in Egypt. Korach only becomes rebellious here. And Korach has an influence on Das and Babiram. How are we to understand that? You would have thought the reverse. But the answer is Das and Babiram. They were scoundrels. There are certain people that no matter what, they'll just fight and they'll argue. Korach was different. That's what I heard from my father. Korach came with an ideology. Korach talked about equality. He talked about Dusha. He talked about Socham Hashem. In their midst is God. He talked religiously. He talked about concern for everybody. Of course, he meant none of it. Now, it's interesting. The Torah tells us. In Pirkei Avos, he says, "Ezuhu machlokas Hashem Shemayim." What is a dispute? The Shem Shemayim for the sake of heaven. That's a machlokas, a dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Between Shammai and Hillel, that's the dispute when the Chachamim dispute what the Jewish law is. Both of them are motivated by Yiras Shamayim, by Avas Torah, by Avas Emes, love of the truth. That's a dispute. That's L'Shem Shemayim, for the sake of heaven. But then they ask, what is a dispute? What is a dispute that is Shalom L'Shem Shemayim, that is not for the sake of heaven? And they say, Machlokas Korach Vadoso. The dispute of Korach and his followers and his camp and his group. And the question is, it should say Machlokas Adas Korach, or Korach with Moshe. What do you mean? Machlokas Korach Vadoso. They were united. The answer is they weren't united. They really disagreed about everything. Each one was motivated by what he wanted. Korach wanted leadership. The 250 Rosh Sanhedrios wanted positions of honor also. The other followers of Korach, they wanted it should be Kalei v'Kulam Doshim. They shouldn't have to listen to anybody. They didn't want to listen to Moshe Rabbeinu. And they probably would not have been happy listening to Korach eventually either. But the power of hate is greater than the power of love. They pushed aside what they wanted for themselves in order to unite. We see this on the college campuses today. All kinds of groups are protesting against Israel. And for what? They protest about people who are being killed. These people didn't protest when they put Jewish children in the ovens. It's hypocrisy. You find people in the gay movement protesting. I saw an interview, and they asked the guy who was going there with the rainbow sign, do you know that if you would be in Gaza, they would throw you off the roof? He said, I heard that. So why do you come here with that? I came. Now, they're all part of the movement. There's just something that unites them, even though it's against their own interest. What unites them is anti-Semitism, hatred of the Jew, hatred of the Jewish people, or the desire to be associated with left-wingers. That's more important to them. They don't focus on their own situation. And sometimes it's because of frustration. They want to blame. The Jews are always used in order to appeal to those who feel unaccomplished, who feel they haven't been able to achieve. That's what Hitler, Yamach Shemo, did. It was always the fault of the Jew. The Jew has no right to defend himself. And if they put rockets in the middle of schools, the Jew has no right. The Jew has to let them shoot from the schools and kill their civilians. I have yet to hear a protest from these people against all the rockets throughout the years that were sent from Gaza into civilian areas. There was hardly ever, not saying there never was, there was hardly ever a time that the terrorists of Gaza focused their attacks on military installations. It was always on civilian installations. Where were these people when bombs were being placed in buses? Where were these people when bombs were being placed where carriages of young children were? If someone comes with a gun at me I've repeated it and I will continue to repeat it. And because the unfortunate thing is we have the Vayihim Machras. You repeat it, the Jews, when they saw Korach falling down, they all ran away. Vayihim Machras, it was the next day. Atem Hamitem Sam Hashem. You are the murderers, they said. October 7th. Many people recognized, not all, many were very happy. Many were celebrating. In the streets of Gaza, there were parades by the so-called civilians who are being attacked now. But many people said that was a terrible thing. But it didn't happen just like that. It was the fault of the Jewish people throughout the years. That's why they raped Jewish women. That's why they put little babies in the oven in front of their mothers. But then, no, they're no longer the murderers. The Jews are the murderers. What was it? Vayihim Machras. It was the next day. Those who are looking for excuses, that was an excuse. Since the first day, they couldn't say anything except saying it didn't happen in a vacuum. But the next day, the Jews are the murderers. Hamas is no longer the murderers. It was the next day. Time gives people an opportunity to make believe, to forget what they don't want to remember. So, now, it's very interesting. So when you take a look at the Meraglim, you take a look at the Meraglim, at the spies. So, and you compare it, the time of Moshe, and compare it to the spies at the time of Yeshua, we see interesting things. In the time of Moshe, when Moshe sent spies, he sent 12 spies. Yeshua sent only 2 spies. Why is it that Yeshua deviated from the practice of Moshe? Now, my father asked a different question, but I think with his answer, we could perhaps answer, well, with adding something to it, we could answer the first question as well. When Yeshua's spies, they encounter such difficulties almost from the moment they come into Yericho. They have to be hidden. They're constantly being sought after. And when they come back to Yeshua, they give Yeshua a positive report. The spies of Moshe, 10 of them, they had it easy. Chazal tell us HaKadosh Baruch Hu manipulated that there should be some big funerals there so people wouldn't focus on them. And they come back and give it a bad report. Why is it that way? That question I heard from my father. And my father said, you take a look at the spies that were sent by Moshe Rabbeinu. The spies sent by Moshe Rabbeinu were Nesiim. They were Nesiim. The spies sent by Yeshua were also great people. According to the Medrash, it was Kaleb ben Yefuna and Pinchas. But the Navi doesn't mention their names, doesn't even mention their names. It's only the Medrash that tells us, it's Chazal who tell us who it was. But the spies sent by Moshe Rabbeinu, they're mentioned, and they're mentioned as Nesiim, as the prince of their tribe. And my father would use the expression, they went out with a parade. The spies of Yeshua did not go out in a parade. So my father said that was the cause of the problem. They went out with a parade. And because they went out with a parade, they gave a bad report. But the spies of Yeshua, they went out just to spy quietly. No one knew who they were. The Navi doesn't reveal who they were. And they came back and gave a positive report. I want to explain that. I want to suggest, what's the idea? Why 12 spies by Moshe? Each Shevet one. What's the significance of each Shevet being one? What's the significance of each Shevet having one spy? Actually, Shevet Levi didn't even have one. But the other Shvatim had. What's the idea? The Rugged Shavar has this, an explanation for it. I don't want to get into the Rugged Shavar's explanation now, but I think it's very simple. In the Midbar, in the desert, the nation, the different Shvatim, to a large degree, were in some form like 12 different nations, like a confederation of nations. In fact, the intermarriage between the Shvatim and the Midbar was somewhat limited. It had to do with the Yerusha. Matter of fact, one of the reasons given for Tu B'Av, for the 15th of Av, why it's a holiday, because that was the day that the ban of marriage between the different Shvatim was removed. And that in a sense, that added a certain unity to the Jewish people. When you're able to marry one with the other, so there is a bond that between the families, between the Shvatim, that makes a nation. But when there are limitations, even if it's not a complete limitation, it sort of weakens the bond that forms a nation. Psychologically. And in the Midbar, the prince, and that is pointed out by some of the Farshim already, that they don't go into the idea of different nations, but the head of each tribe, the prince of each tribe, had a position of power that became more limited when the Jewish people entered Eretz Yisrael. When the bond between the tribes became stronger, and they became one nation in a stronger sense. And perhaps because of the way the facts were, that's why Moshe Rabbeinu, they saw themselves as 12 different nations that were united in some form or shape. That had like a confederation. So it could be that because of that, each Nasi, he viewed everything from the perspective of his group. But once he started viewing it from the perspective of his group, he was no longer viewing it from the perspective of the Jewish people, of Klal Yisrael. And once they ceased to view it from the perspective of Klal Yisrael, they began to view it from the perspective of themselves. They came to realize that once the Jewish people enter Israel, at least eventually, their authority, the authority of the Nasi, as well as the independence of each Shevet, will be lessened. And because of that, they sinned, because they recognized that their position will become less. So what motivated them? What motivated them was their desire for power, to be the head of a nation. And that started out with concern for their own group. And to a certain degree, I think that perhaps we are suffering from that today. Not in the same way, chas v'shalom. But I think different groups, in evaluating what is important for Klal Yisrael, use it from the perspective of their group, not from the perspective of Klal Yisrael in general. The yeshivas view it from the perspective of the yeshivas. The Chilonim view it from the perspective of the Chilonim. Those who live inside Eretz Yisrael proper, what I say, all of Eretz Yisrael is proper, but the territories that they captured in 48, when they evaluate things, sometimes it's evaluated from a real estate perspective. And those in the territories sometimes evaluated on the basis of the territories. Everybody views it from their own perspective. And I'm not going to say who's right and who's wrong. But everybody views things from their own perspective. And when the attack happened on October 7th, there was a certain unity that took place. Something that we haven't seen for a long time. Honestly, I haven't seen something like that since the Six-Day War. But all of a sudden, many of those who joined in this unity are beginning to think about their political position. They're wanting to be a prime minister or a Nasi. And they think that they have moments of opportunity here. Just as Korach thought he had a moment of opportunity. Because the Jewish people were upset. We're very upset. And I'm not finding fault with the relatives and friends of those that were taken as hostages. Of course, their focus has to be on their children. But I think there are a lot of people that are joining, not because of their concern so much for the hostages, but because they see an opportunity to find fault with the government. And they want to find a fault before an investigation is made to find out who was really at fault. And maybe they're trying to cover it up. I certainly don't have any knowledge of whose fault it was. But we can't assume until we know. And I'm sure no one meant that it should be the way it was. But there are probably people that are at fault for one reason or another. And it could be that whatever they thought would be a problem came something much bigger than they anticipated. And perhaps, I don't know, but perhaps it had to do with their perspective of advancing their own causes for leadership, or finding fault with the existing leadership. The power of hatred sometimes is greater than the power of love. But people are running to conclusions before they know the facts. Not a sign of intelligence if you're motivated by truth. However, if you're motivated by falsehood, if you're motivated by advancing your political career, if you're part of the school of Korach, it's very interesting. I once saw, I don't remember where, but I saw brought one of the Mefarshim that Lavan, Arami Oved Avi, Lavan, when he played the trick of Yaakov, of substituting Leah for Rachel, what was his motive? His motive was to create conflict within the Jewish people. That's what brought Yosef down to Egypt. It was the sons of Leah that were jealous of the way Yosef acted, the way Yaakov acted towards Yosef. And in a sense, this was the seed of divisiveness in Klal Yisrael for generations to come. The split. It wasn't the same parties anymore, but the concept of separation, of divisiveness, was planted in Klal Yisrael through Lavan. Wasn't part of Klal Yisrael. He was outside Klal Yisrael. But he saw himself as an ally. He saw himself, I care about them also. I care about you. Why didn't you tell me? I would have made a parade for you when you left. What is it? In other words, divisiveness in Klal Yisrael. This is Korach. Korach was, in a sense, the tree that grew from the seeds that were planted by Lavan. And today we have people outside Klal Yisrael that speak of their friendship to the Jewish people. You know, when I was a boy, I heard a story that there was a certain person during the Civil War. He didn't know whether to support the North or to support the South. If he became part of the North and he wore a blue suit, he joined the Northern Army, he was scared that the South would shoot him. And if he joined the South and wore a gray suit, the North would shoot him. So what did he do? He put on a blue shirt and a gray pair of pants. He got a gray bullet in his shirt and a blue bullet in his pants. And that's what we're facing now. The loved ones who are trying to plant seeds of discontentment, of divisiveness among the Jewish people. And they wear a blue shirt and black and white pants, or vice versa. And what they're learning the hard way is they'll get 2 bullets, not 1. We have to recognize that and very often when they come to destroy us, they're doing it because of their own motive. Korach. Why is it that why? Why didn't they tell us the whole pasuk what Korach took? Yes, he took parts of Klal Yisrael with him. Divisiveness. He brought supporters. He was motivated by leadership, but he tried to create a unity based on negativism. He promised everything to everybody, even though it was contradictory. And people followed him. Why? And he himself, they lose contact with reality. And it catches up with them. And not only catches up with them, people want to continue believing it. And on that day itself, they can't. But a day later, they can make believe it didn't happen. And that's what we're seeing today. People who consider themselves the protectors of Israel, Jewish people. That was yesterday. Today there is an election. We have to know that people are motivated. Very often people are motivated only by position, by power. But they make a whole story. They talk nicely about the Jewish people. We can't fall for it. You're either, as one president once said, you're either with us or against us. You can't be both. And we have to let the people know that we're not going to take hypocrisy. And whether the hypocrisy comes from the loved ones who claim to have a relationship with the Jewish people, or the hypocrisy comes from within the Jewish people, we recognize who is who. But it's not enough to recognize. We have to stop being stupid. Unfortunately, there are many people that want to be stupid. They want to join the movement, even though the movement is against the Jewish people. But their power of hatred is stronger than their power of love. The power of hatred of the people who are supporting Israel is stronger than their power of love of the left-wingers who hate Israel. I'm not talking against liberals. There are certain liberals who are supporting Israel. The senator from Pennsylvania is supporting Israel. But we have to let them know we're going to hold you responsible. What's most important to us is As Achayin Doresh. The Yehuda, the Jewish people are called Judah. Why are they called Judah? Because Yehuda said that I am responsible for my brother. He took responsibility for Binyamin. And that's our responsibility today. We have to know, are we going to support Israel, or are we going to support, or are we not going to support Israel? Are we going to support the survival of the Jewish people? Or without saying so, support those who are put Jewish children in the ovens. Support those who send rockets into throughout the years, send rockets to the civilian areas, because we want to be part of their movement. Do we want to be with the murderers, or do we want to save our people? That is the question that we have to decide.
Any questions, please, in the chat? Moshe, no questions.
Okay. Okay. All right. Next Sunday again. Okay.
Yes, Chodesh
Tammuz, yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. Next week, same time. All right. Bye.
Okay.
Stop recording.